Welcome to GPT, Grace People's Talk, and this is going to be the third episode on the woman at the well. And Jesus' conversation with her was really deep, and we did two episodes. One about the approach of Christ, and the other about the misconception that is found in worship as well as the soul winning. And this episode, we are going to talk more about worship. And we know in the Bible, right, at least in John chapter 3 and 4, there are three musts. The first must is you must be born again, John chapter 3 verse 7. And 7 verses later, Jesus Christ did say that the Son of Man must be lifted up. And the third must, we have it in John chapter 4 verse 24. You must worship God in spirit and truth, for Father seeks such true worshippers. And that is going to be the topic today, about worship and the worshipper, the object of worship, the way in which you worship. Jesus did give some explanation on that, and we thought we would discuss more on that and do a GPT on it. And this is Pastor Guru, and with me is Nalini, my wife, and let's talk about it.
Yes. When I was personally meditating Guru John 4, the question was, the Father seeks such worshippers. I think that only got my attention. Okay, the Father is looking out for a worshipper. So God, I want to be that worshipper. So what do you want me to, So then it says that, we know whom we are worshiping. So Christ was pointing to the object of worship, that, it is God the Father. And so that really enlightened me to, it was God who brought that, that illustration, and that really opened a world of understanding concerning worship. So, that I thought I would just explain it through a prop. I was just thinking, if this is like a throne and, someone who sits on this and he is the object of worship, and say, if this is the object of worship, the one who is sitting here, then, let's say this is the worshipper, the person whom this object of worship, they worship. And then there is a way in which this person, the worshipper, is going to express his or her worship towards, the object of worship. So this really enlightened me to see the whole Bible in the light of, this illustration. And that, I was like awestruck to see how God really seeks worship. This whole John 4 also took another turn altogether. I was just thinking, when Israel was just out of Egypt, coming out in the wilderness, they had lived in a heathen land and then had picked up so much of heathenistic practices. And then immediately when Moses, the leader, was up for more than 40 days, the only thing they could think of the object to worship was a golden calf. And then they bought a idol here, and then they didn't know how to express it, but the way of worship they expressed towards this golden calf was the sensual way which they learnt in Egypt. So we see here that there was, the object of worship is wrong, and the way in which they worshipped was wrong, and it just stirred up the anger of God.
Yes.
And the worshipper themselves shamed themselves with nakedness, and we see that this is what is more prevalent in among people who are not born again, that the very object of worship, itself could be wrong, and their way of worship could be also wrong towards the object of worship.
Yes.
Right.
Sometimes, I can, after I get saved and my mind is filled with my past, right? So I can bring in all that the Israelites could think of is the Egyptians' primary god, that is the golden calf. And they brought in here, and they shamed themselves. And I love the way Apostle Paul writes about worship in Romans chapter 12 verse 2. How do you present your bodies? Right? So he says, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And he is wanting us to present our bodies, as a living sacrifice. And then later on, he says that, so be renewed in your mind. right? So that's very important.
Wow, that's beautiful. In fact, this also led me to search for the first mention of the word worship, which runs back to Genesis, where the first time the word it's mentioned, where Abraham is asked to sacrifice Isaac. So I was thinking, if this was Abraham, he was absolutely convinced, because eventually in Hebrews it also says that his faith was perfected, by the fact that when he knew to whom he was sacrificing, that what he was going to sacrifice was nothing compared to the person to whom he was sacrificing. I thought, like, the heart that was won over by, God's attributes caused him to give away things that could be actually so dear to him, naturally. But then, you know what? The one who deserves it was a test. But eventually, the heart that was captured with this gratitude would do any extent to please this, just as a overflow of gratitude.
Wow. Right. Unbelievable. Yeah, I accept that. No, so James quotes that as the evidence of, in a sense, the salvation. Right, in James chapter 2, when he is talking about the works and the faith, and faith that produces the work, and he is in a sense quoting that incident. Abraham gave the son back to God, and was he not justified by through his works? That is the sign of a born again believer, isn't it?
Wow. Yes. But what amazes me is there was this genuine doubt I did have. Now let's take, I was just thinking of Luke 18. Now, if you see, there was this Pharisee. Let's put this first worshipper as the Pharisee. I'm going to get this pen. Now, this is the publican. Now, both have come to the right object of worship, which is God. So here the object of worship is right. Now, let's say this worshipper, that is the Pharisee, what he had to say to God was his achievements, how he is committed, the ways of his worship. He says, is I've kept it to the T. I have sacrificed, I have given the tithe, I pray, I fast, and you know what? You need to be impressed, God. But then here is the publican who is not even close to the throne, but it says that he didn't even lift his eyes up, but he says, be merciful to me, the sinner. And then Christ is asking, who went home justified? So what could be the error? Like the object of worship is right, but where is the flaw when it comes to these two worship?
Yeah, I would say the understanding of righteousness. Right, the whole story, Jesus Christ is summing up who went home righteous, who went home being made righteous by God. I want to read one verse from Romans chapter 10. Look at here. It says, verse 2, about the Jewish people. I testify about them, they have a zeal for God, but their zeal is not according to the knowledge, or in accordance with the knowledge. So, which means like their zeal lacked one particular knowledge. You want to know what is that knowledge that they lacked in their zeal? And he talks about it in the next verse. He says they did not have a proper knowledge of the righteousness of God. All right. So because they lived in the ignorance concerning the righteousness of God, you know what they did? They sought to establish their own righteousness. And that is what the Pharisee was doing. And in his worship, and he had the zeal, but he lacked a tremendous amount of knowledge concerning the righteousness of God. And there was a display of ignorance. And what Apostle Paul tells in the next sentence or next part is even more scarier. And they did not have the proper knowledge of righteousness, and they wanted to establish their own righteousness. And then he says they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. This is not ignorance of righteousness. You know what it is? It is the rebellion against the righteousness of God. So the word they did not submit themselves, which means like they wanted to really stand against God himself. And that is the way that, no, so you see that man is worshipping, yes, he is lacking knowledge concerning the righteousness of God, and he wants to establish his own righteousness. But down the line, look where it takes you to. And it takes you to kind of like, no, you don't want to come under the righteousness of which comes by faith. And Apostle Paul says in Philippians chapter 3 verse 9, I want to be found not having mine own righteousness, but which is derived from the law, but I want to have the righteousness which comes through faith. And then he says, I may know the power and resurrection of Christ. And that publican understood, okay, God's righteousness is something that is way above, and I cannot match up to it. And because he knew about God's righteousness, and he was able to submit himself. And that is one of the most important and vital element in our worship.
Wow. In fact, that reminds me also that, to the Samaritan women, when Christ says, the Father seeks such worshippers who will worship him in spirit and truth. The truth of the fact that it's not just the Bible in letters, but understanding the very righteousness that I can never attain to it, but it is given to me in mercy. And then receive that gift of mercy and forgiveness and be set free.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely. So, when we read about the truth, if you read the entire Gospel of John, and at one point in time, you have to come and stand, and who is the truth? John 14 verse 6. And he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. And the moment I understand that Christ is the truth, and he is the one that is going to qualify me, and I go to the Father through him, and Father seeks such true worshippers who worship in spirit and truth.
Wow. That's nice. In fact, as you're saying this, I'm also reminded of what Pastor Shala had preached. He was re-preaching this message of about the sinner lady who came in, to the Simon the Pharisee's home. Here is Christ sitting, and there is she who comes in, and then the Pharisees are the judging eyes. But she was not bothered. She understood the object of worship and what she would receive from him. Absolute mercy. That the prying eyes around her never meant anything to her, but she knew that there was a place of access that she had with God, in the midst of prying eyes. And the epitome of this, I also think, was displayed by Mary, when before a week before Christ's crucifixion, it says that she broke the alabaster box and poured it at the feet of Jesus. I feel that her recognition that the object of worship deserves everything, even my very life, and this box is nothing, in as much as it could be so costly, but he deserves much more. A heart that is broken and won over by love, that made her to give away anything but the ones that were sitting around, especially even Judas, when he made that remark, buy this waste. The worship is not now for him. The act of worship seemed costly, and he connected it to something philosophical. But if you see, her heart of worship was one of to the whom the worship deserves.
Yes.
And Christ says this will be a memorial.
Yes.
Right.
I think the only person for whom Christ raised a memorial is for that lady. There is also an opportunity, right? The time and opportunity that I see in that portion where Christ says that you will always have the poor, right? But you will not have me. And what about the missed opportunity for worship, right? Could I have poured out my life at an appropriate time when God kind of leads me to, and I could have postponed it, right? Or thought otherwise, so this could be sold and given to the poor. But Jesus said, okay, you always have the poor, but not me. And he talked about the time in the aspect of Mary, and that I see very evidently and clearly about the missed opportunities, right? So this lady broke the alabaster box then and there itself, and Christ raised a memorial. And the other one is the one who is forgiven much,
yes,
loves much. And it's not with respect to the time, but look where I've been, or what I was, and how much of the forgiveness that I have received. And to Simon, he said, "You never even gave me water to wash my feet, but look at this lady. So that is the aspect that we see
I think
in this.
that is where Hebrews 12 sums up saying that, you know what, fix your eyes on Jesus because he is the object of your faith. Then you run the race.
Yes.
You know, leaving away every besetting sin because, you know what, the one who did that for you deserves all the more.
Yes.
So I think that's the exhortation God gives us.
Amen.
Right.
So we have come to the end of the GPT, and here we conclude about a few points. It may not be exhaustive, but some of the points that we spoke about worship, and I hope they minister to your heart. Continue watching GPT. Thank you so much. Have a great day.